The real role of the death midwife is to go into the home and to have these conversations. Just like my birth midwife, I birthed at home, and just as my baby was coming down, my birth midwife was saying, "It's just your baby coming out, honey. Just breathe, just take a breath." And to say that to somebody who's dying, it's just your body that's dying. It's okay, just take a breath. We want to hear that because when we're in our dying process, we know that's what's happening. But while everybody else is standing around aghast, not willing to state the obvious, we are not allowed the intimate process of being present to our dying. And that's what the role of her or him is about.
The Vidal Speaks podcast.
Episode number 50, Olivia Bareham, Death Midwife, preparing ourselves for a conscious and peaceful transition. Welcome to Vidal Speaks. My name is Deborah Vidal, former 11-year LPGA golf pro turned classical homeopath, certified plant-based nutritionist, and wellness coach. Each week here on Vidal Speaks, we bring you knowledge, inspiration, or natural remedies to help you take charge of your health and feel your best. I believe health is freedom and knowledge is power, so tuning in each week will give you the power to take steps towards freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back from having the energy to do all you want in life. No matter where you are in your journey of wellness, Vidal Speaks can help. I promise. Hi, Vidal Speaks podcasters. How are you guys? Did you have a great Christmas? I hope so. I did, and I'm always sad that it's over. Somehow to me, the day after Christmas is the end of the holidays. Although I know there's New Year's around the corner, but that's a very different holiday. It's about the future and taking steps for starting anew with many things. The new year comes and our resolutions kick in so we can make plans to have a great year, whether it's in business or our relationships or with our own personal health. Christmas to me is the end of the year. When something ends, it's like a death in a way, because before the new can begin, something has to end. It's like life itself. Birth starts our process here, and death is the end of our journey. But it's also like when we end a career and begin another. The death of the prior career gave birth to the possibility of the next one. Same with relationships. When we lose a relationship, it can feel like a death sometimes. But with that, the possibilities for something greater begins. This is when learning to trust in life's process is really difficult, but it sure can pay off. How many of you can look back now and say, wow, I remember when I lost that job or I lost that person in my life and I thought it was over, and now I can say I'm so much happier than ever before. That's certainly the case for me, I know. I've lost relationships, jobs, and many really great people in my life, and honestly, I can say now that I've never been in a better place. I'm a person that when the loss happens, I put a lot of faith into my belief to trust in life and that I'm meant to go through this so I can be put on a better path. Ultimately, it's important for me to feel I'm doing my life work in this lifetime, and with every loss, it has guided me closer to that point. So I'm grateful, although the losses were never easy, often they were horrible, but I just kept focusing on that process and it really helped me get through the situation at the time. Well, today's show is also about the ending of something very precious, and that is life itself. Yes, it's about death and dying. My guest today is Olivia Bareham. She is a death midwife or a death doula. Her mission is to educate and support individuals toward a conscious, peaceful transition and to empower and guide families to reclaim the healing ritual of a home funeral. I know it sounds crazy, you guys, and many of you are probably going to say, gosh, this is so dreadful. But the truth is, not speaking of it is actually crazy. If we never speak about our wishes or do any preparation for our own death, then how can we expect or assume that others will know what we want? Preparation does not just mean having a will. It doesn't mean just having an advance directive, actually, but that's a big one, and I hope every one of you out there already have an advance medical directive. Too many people end up in a situation they never wanted only because they didn't have one. None of us can predict when we will die or how, so please make sure after this show you begin the steps to be prepared for when that time comes and when you die. But preparation is also a very deep emotional issue that we all have to face. And as you can imagine, the very thought of dying provokes fear and dread in most people. As a culture, we deny the natural process of aging and death, and we focus on prolonging life at any cost. Olivia says that, sadly, that cost is often the price of a peaceful, natural, and joyful transition. When we can face our fears and prepare ourselves spiritually, emotionally, and mentally for our final transition, then when the time comes to let go, we can say no thank you to life support and welcome death support. Olivia says that dying consciously with grace, acceptance, and a sense of fulfillment is the greatest gift we can leave our loved ones. That makes a lot of sense to me. Many cultures have deep rituals around death and dying that aid both the loved one and the deceased in a way to allow a healthier and happier transition. I've read some books about death and dying, and it's really interesting all the rituals around death. For the loved ones, this ritual helps us through the shock, gives us time to have our final goodbyes, and celebrate the life of our loved one with our other family members and friends. This eases us out of our grief and transitions us back into life because we see the beauty then in their passing, and we're not left to just grieve their loss alone and with no support. Also, many cultures think that the 3 days after death is an important time for the transition of the soul of the deceased too. It is only in the last 100 years that this tradition was taken over by modern funeral homes. Death is now marketed as them helping us make it a hassle-free experience rather than a ritual as it was before. But no hassles, and what they feel is more convenient for the loved ones has put us into total suppression with our own grief. And in the end, we are missing out on a very rich and important journey in life, which is our exit. So just as the year is ending, so will we someday. I just ask you to be open-minded today and listen to what Olivia has to teach us. All of us will die, that's for sure, and all of us can take away something useful in today's show. May this show make you think, and may it make us all take some steps in preparedness. So before we start, though, let me tell you a little bit about Olivia. Reverend Olivia Bareham, founder of Sacred Crossings, is a certified death midwife, home funeral guide, and a celebrant. She holds bachelor's degrees in education and natural theology and sacred healing and is an ordained interfaith minister. Olivia's experience as an auxiliary nurse, hospice volunteer, and her mother's end-of-life caregiver inspired her to investigate more meaningful and personal alternatives to traditional funeral practices. Here's a quote from Olivia. At the event of death and for a few days following, there is a window of opportunity for great healing to occur. When the funeral home took my mother's body away just hours after her death, I felt this window close. We were left feeling helpless, unsure, and wishing that we had had a little more time. End of quote. In an effort to provide a way to keep this window open and facilitate the healing process, Olivia immersed herself in the study of death and dying, culminating in certification as a death midwife and home funeral guide. She subsequently created her business, Sacred Crossings, with the mission of empowering and guiding families to reclaim the lost art and healing ritual of a home funeral. Over the next 10 years, the demand for information about conscious dying, after death care, and home funerals increased. Olivia is a writer, producer, and public speaker. She is an active member of the National Home Funeral Alliance and past president of the board for the Los Angeles Hospice at Topanga Canyon. Sacred Crossings is a Los Angeles-based company offering education, support, and guidance for conscious dying and home funerals. And Sacred Crossing Guides assist families with end-of-life planning, death midwifery, creating a vigil in a funeral home, and cremation or burial arrangements. Their Education Institute offers workshops and classes and a certificate program in the art of death midwifery. Students are both professional and non-professional end-of-life caregivers and those wishing to delve deeper into the dying process to further their spiritual growth. Graduates of the Death Midwifery program are eligible to serve as Sacred Crossing Guides. The Sacred Crossings Funeral Home is coming soon and will offer a full range of services, including cremation, burial, funerals, and memorials. Sacred Crossings is a non-denominational service without cultural or religious discrimination. While it's best to begin funeral planning in advance, we can help a family at any time. Okay, you guys ready to hear this one? Let's go talk to Olivia now. Here we go. Hello, Olivia. Welcome to the Vidal Speaks podcast.
Hi, Deborah. It's lovely to talk to you.
Well, I really look forward to sharing your information about all your great work because I think it's going to be new to many listeners, and yet it's such an important topic because every single one of us is going to experience death, right?
That's right. We don't get out of here alive.
That's true. So let's first start by just telling us what the definition of a doula is.
Well, some people use the term doula. Some of us use the term midwife, death midwife. And there are different definitions. Traditionally, a birth midwife is one who sees the mother and her baby through the transition of birth until the baby's into the world. And this is very much the same with a death midwife. We are there to assist the one who's making their transition safely over to the other side. And the reason I got into the work was because it became clear to me that the 3 days following death were critically important for the family members, for those who have just lost a loved one. It takes 3 days to really integrate that traumatic event. And even if the person was on hospice, the actual act of their leaving is still a traumatic event for those left behind. And it takes about 3 days to really fully adjust to this new life without your loved one. And for the sake of the one who is transitioning, in my experience, it takes about 3 days for the light body, if you will, to completely leave the physical realm and make its way on its journey. And in many ancient texts, it talks about the sacred 3 days following death. Christ was in the tomb for 3 days. So our midwife right through the process from perhaps terminal diagnosis right through to burial or cremation, and that includes the vigil or the 3-day wake.
Wow, that's so interesting because that 3 days after death, I have so many questions about that. I know there's many cultures that focus on the dying experience, but I just am curious if you had a loved one yourself that taught you about that 3 days because of a personal experience, or if it was something that you read or you learned. How did you learn about the importance of that 3 days after death?
Well, I learned really because I missed it. My mother, when she died and we prepared her body, she was then taken away by the funeral home about 6 hours after she died. And I felt bereft. And it wasn't because my mother died. It was because her body had been taken away. And I began to realize that there was an opportunity for healing and an integration on my part that was robbed. I was robbed of it. That's what I got for myself, and I wanted to reclaim that which I lost. And it's only since I've been doing the work and I've been studying over the last 12 years, and now I see for myself the change that happens in the physical body, not just on the physical level, but on the psychic and spiritual realm too.
So let's talk a little bit about it first from the point of view of the family members that are losing the loved one in those 3 days. What are things that should take place that don't normally take place when we remove the body too soon or the loved one too soon?
Well, the most important one is the preparation of the body, that opportunity to hold your loved one and very tenderly and carefully just put a washcloth over the face to close the eyes and the nose, and to maybe wash the hair, to clean off anything from the physical realm, from this beautiful body, and then to dress it either in the clothes that the loved one picked out, or more often than not now, I'm using a shroud, and we'll shroud the naked body in beautiful linen, pure fabric. It's like swaddling the newborn baby as when it arrives. We're doing that at the end to the deceased, to this shell now. That in itself is a very powerful ritual. It's like doing everything possible you can to honor and clean and lay to rest this incredible body.
Let's say that people arrived at a later hour from when the loved one passed. Is it still possible whoever's with them could begin that preparation? And is it still possible for the person that arrives later to get through this transition in a healthy way if they weren't there in the first, say, 12 hours?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And of course, that happens many times. They have to get a flight, they leave out of state. And by the time they arrive, they're walking into a room where now the body is prepared and shrouded and laid on a table or a bed in the home. And everybody's had a chance to exhale. There's soft music playing and candles. And this other relative can now move into this home and feel embraced by the love that's palpable in the room, and move over to the deceased and have their own special quiet time with them. There's no shock. There's not a feeling of missing anything, of not having enough time.
And so this preparation that takes place of the deceased, that should be done fairly soon after the death, where you dress them and close their eyes and lay them out in a beautiful place. This should happen. That would be one of the first things to do.
Yes, most definitely. That happens, within hours, because I like to do it before rigor mortis sets in, which is usually, within 4 hours. And then, of course, the dry ice. We get the dry ice right away, so the body is preserved, and then there's no breaking down of the organs because the ice is underneath.
I see. And on the member's side, on the family member side, how is this different than, say, because traditionally we remove the body, the family is left grieving at the house alone, and can you walk through the process of the family members' experience doing it that way?
Well, the first thing is the strangers who arrive with a gurney, usually in the middle of the night, and the body is bagged and zipped up. It's not pleasant to watch that. You've been with your loved one for hours, if not days, if not months while they're dying. And now, especially if the basics haven't been done, the mouth closed and the eyes closed, and it's pushed into a bag, that is very traumatic to witness. And then it's wheeled out into the night. You don't know where it's going. It's put into a refrigerator somewhere for who knows how many days before a funeral home will do their preparation, which is not the tender, loving washcloth and warm, soapy water, as many of us know. Especially if they're going to be viewed and the body is embalmed. That's a very invasive process, of which the family have no part of. So the family are left in their living room putting away medical supplies, and it's very disconcerting. It's fracturing. A lot of people have used that word. They feel lost, they feel helpless, they feel disempowered, confused, but those are the feelings that we want to heal by involving the family in this beautiful ritual.
I see. And I think in many cultures, I remember reading the Tibetan book of the death and dying. In many cultures, they really honor the process of dying. But in our culture, we seem to really focus on prolonging life at any cost. And the quality of life is often gone, and still we work on prolonging life. I'm just curious why you think that so many Americans especially, but I think it's many other cultures too, that fear the dying process. Why is that? How did we get to that point?
Well, I think that death phobia is rampant in our culture, and I believe that one of the most significant reasons for this is because death has been taken out of our lives because of the funeral industry. Inadvertently, nothing was done on purpose, but because of this, we're just completely unfamiliar with it, and it comes as a shock to everybody. So just this very simple ritual of holding and bathing your dead and watching them and having them there in the home for 3 days is a huge step towards beginning to heal this phobia that we have as a culture.
It's almost as if the funeral homes have made it so convenient, but that convenience to remove everything so fast has caused us a big separation and kind of long-term emotional problems.
Exactly. And it's the same with so many things in our culture. When modern conveniences took over, we lost touch with our connection, I think, to nature, to the world, to each other. And this is a time for us to really take stock and look at that.
That's true. If we think about that, look at our food system. As soon as we got packaged convenience foods and microwaves, everything went downhill.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Including, making it so convenient to eat a fast meal that no one eats together anymore.
Yeah, and people have forgotten how to cook.
Yeah.
We're out of touch with what happens to our waste. We just throw it in the trash and we don't think about it. But something happens, and it has an effect on the environment, and now we're paying the price for that.
Absolutely. And so after this 3-day period, then is there more ritual after that?
Yes, on the 3rd day, what I do is I transfer the body from where it's been laying in honor into a casket. That in itself is a little ritual. And then if it's all going to take place in the home, the family will be a part of that. It's an opportunity to say our final words of goodbye before we close the lid of the box. This is either, a basic cardboard cremation casket or a pine box or something environmentally friendly, usually, that they've brought into the home. And then we like to do a service right there in the house, the funeral service. So friends and relatives come by in the living room, or sometimes it's held in the backyard. Very intimate, cozy. So you're not renting a huge space because everything's at home. And then after that, the body is taken away to the crematory or the cemetery.
I see. And I know from either someone who did a training with you or also from reading on your website and things that some people make their own special box and paint it or paste pictures of the deceased all over their loved one, or it can be very, very personal experience what the person is laid in, correctly? Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's a big part of the home funeral, is decorating the box. So the body will be laying in honor somewhere in the home, and maybe on the patio or the balcony, the cardboard box, which I paint white and take it to the home with art supplies. Everyone who walks through the door gets to decorate it and write a final message or pictures. And especially children, they love this part of the process. They get to draw a special picture for Grandpa and write something they couldn't say to him, perhaps because he wasn't able to talk in the end. That's powerful.
That is really powerful. And the fact that you said that they can be cremated or buried gave me a little sigh of relief, because I was a child that was so deadly afraid of being buried. I don't know. It's just I have an innate fear I was born with it, to be buried in a casket. As a kid, I used to say to my mom, please don't bury me in a box under the earth. So when the Catholic Church allowed cremation, I was relieved. So that was one of my questions. Like, does it matter either way for the deceased to be cremated or buried?
I don't think it can matter at all. Of course, the Jewish faith, they believe the body needs to be buried, and also the Catholics, so that all of the parts are together with the earth. And then the Buddhists and the Hindus, they believe it has to be cremated. So they must both be right? And it's as we believe, so it is. But getting back to that question of the fear of being buried, once you've been present to the body for 3 days, you absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt that that loved one is not there, that them and this body are two separate things. So it's easier to just completely let it go and to know you're just disposing of a shell.
I imagine that would be helpful. But it's interesting that the Buddhists believe in cremation and the Jewish believe in burials, and hence maybe why I love so much of the Buddhist principles, because that's just been a part of what I've wanted always in my life. But I think what's really important about this conversation is people to express what it is they want, because many times we're not prepared in death, and we have our service what others, think we may want. So it's probably very important to really early on tell people what you want.
Yes, you must, because if you don't, they can't guess what it is you would like, and then that burden of responsibility of making the right decision is on them, and that's often painful to have to live with for the rest of your life, worrying whether you did the right thing. So even if that's the only thing you write down or share with your loved ones, say, if I die, I'd like to be cremated.
Yeah, and I imagine you come across so many families in doing your work that are totally unprepared in every way.
Completely unprepared. And that's why I created the Death Care Directive, which is a little booklet that you can write down every little wish that you have, whether you want a shroud, you want to be buried in your wedding dress, your suit, who would you like to bathe you, where would you like to be laid in the house, or whether you want a traditional funeral or a home funeral. All of these little questions are answered, written down, and then you put them in your death file, and you get on with your life. So, and I've made it clear to my daughter, there's a big folder, it's called Death File. It's got everything you need in it.
And what kind of preparation financially should, and I don't really mean financially in money ways, but just like the business side, the other agreements and documents, what are some other things that are really important to have in your death file?
The most important one is the healthcare directive, which is where you assign somebody close to you to make your decisions about your medical decisions before you die. So it's your healthcare directive, your death care directive, life insurance policy, your will, bank account information, passwords, all of those things. And I can send a list to anybody who would like that. If you write to me at olivia@sacredcrossings.com, I can send you the long list of all the little details. But those are the basic things.
And Olivia, if you could send that to me, and I will post it in the show notes, because I'm going to put in the notes a lot of what we talked about today and any links to your site and how people can reach you and stuff. So send that to me and I'll post it in the notes.
Very good. Be happy to.
That's a place where I think many people are unprepared. Even the simple healthcare derivative is something many people, even in their 50s and 60s, haven't done yet. And that's a disaster.
It is. That's why so many people can end up on life support for years, when what you really wanted was death support as soon as you were unable to eat or drink. But these deep questions, they take time to ponder, and they're very challenging. But that's why it's critical to get this healthcare directive and take a look at it and answer those questions and find somebody in your life who you really trust to follow your wishes at the end. Just because you think about it doesn't mean that you're going to bring it on any sooner, which is what a lot of people are afraid of, unfortunately.
Right.
And it doesn't take that long, but it's critical. I've seen so much pain and suffering because those simple questions have been unanswered.
Well, and also, I think in my experience, when they go to the hospital, let's say with an acute pneumonia, and they're an old elderly person, and that pneumonia can fast turn into death, or maybe they're unhealthy to begin with, like a lot of cancer patients at the end, and they get a pneumonia. If they happen to have been at home and they're going to the emergency room, they will ask them, do you want to be intubated, which means do you want to be fed with a feeding tube? And if you say yes and you're in the hospital, most times you will not get that out again. And a lot of people don't realize that. I've had that experience with some close people in my life. And so I always have told people, if you really are going there and you are done, you feel like you don't want your life prolonged anymore, don't say yes in that dire situation. But a lot of people don't understand. It just thinks maybe they'll give me something to breathe better, but they just say yes because they're not feeling well, and they just are in this like desperate state to feel better. And then they're stuck, and now they have a feeding tube on, and they're just there for months.
Exactly. I agree. It's not pretty. There's a place you can also go to now, or you can fill out your directives online at mydirectives.com. is an online place where you can answer these questions. And I find that's an interesting resource for people.
That's great. And I just also wonder what you think about hospice and the work of hospice.
Oh, I love hospice. We are so fortunate to have that in our culture. So, and that's another thing that people are afraid to move towards, because they think once I agree to hospice, I've pretty much given up, and this means I'm going to die. And just that thought prevents them from choosing that option. And so sadly, many people don't get hospice until maybe the last 2 days of their life. And it's a fabulous way to receive the help and the care that you need in the comfort of your own home. And it will give you those extra months, hopefully years even. Some people actually live a lot longer on hospice than they do normally, because they're getting the kind of care that they wouldn't get if they were grasping at straws in a hospital setting.
That's true. And like you said, I think when you say the word hospice, the word that people associate with that is just terminal, terminal illness. Mm-hmm. And I know in the case of my mom, when she had what the doctors would say was a terminal illness, I mean, you just never know. I mean, she could have lived 5 more years or 1 month, you don't know. But my dad, who's a medical doctor, really wanted to put her in hospice, but she was very afraid. She just heard the word no, 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 because like you said, people are afraid because it thinks that means they've given up and that's the end. But what my dad sat down and explained to her is it's so much work for you to get up. She was on oxygen, to get in the car, to go to the doctor's office, to sit in the waiting room around all these other sick people. Why do that when they can come to you in your own home and be relaxed? And really, their hospice is one of the best services I've ever experienced myself. They were so great to us, our family. And as the hospice doctor told my mom, Phyllis, we could kick you out of here. We want you to get well, and then we'll kick you out. So it's not an end-all thing, but you have to be in a certain life stage to be able to receive it. I know that, but as you said, they can live for a long time after that and still get the care in their own home. And I think it's not only important for the patient, but for the family. It's so much easier on the family to have that support team all around them.
It is. And in this conversation, I just have to say that I think the very sad thing is that people are so unwilling to have the terminal diagnosis conversation and to embrace and integrate the fact that, yes, they are going to die, that the physical body is not going to live forever. And perhaps those thoughts and being with the idea that the physical body is dying openly and honestly with people who are willing to hold that a container for you to experience that in your dying days, that is where very powerful healing of the soul, the spirit, the emotions can take place. And that is what we are not embracing in this clutching towards straws to prolong life. And all we do is prolong death and suffering. And so the role, and getting back to that, interestingly, the real role of the death midwife is to go into the home and to have these conversations. Just like my birth midwife, I birthed at home. And just as my baby was coming down, my birth midwife was saying, it's just your baby coming out, honey. Just breathe, just take a breath. And to say that to somebody who's dying, it's just your body that's dying. It's okay. Just take a breath. We want to hear that, because when we're in our dying process, we know that's what's happening. But while everybody else is standing around aghast, not willing to state the obvious, we are not allowed the intimate process of being present to our dying. And that's what the death midwife is, the role of her or him is about.
Wow, that's so beautifully said, because I really think that's where the big block is in our culture and many other cultures. It really is about this wanting to live. And on the patient side, many of them feel if they would, let's say they really felt that way and they would say that others would see them as giving up, or because it's only good if you're like positive every day, I'm going to make it, I'm going to survive this, instead of being honest and saying, no, I really feel my time is up and I'm dying. And that conversation alone, I mean, how deep that could be, and how much we could all learn from each other and support each other before the patient dies. It's such a beautiful thing.
Yes, and that is our final gift to our loved ones, is the way that we die. And if we can die in such an open, loving space, then our loved ones are going to receive that, so that when their time comes to die, they won't be so afraid, because they'll have witnessed somebody else ahead of them embracing it and going almost joyously. I have a few clients right now who, because they've been having the conversation for a while, and one young man, he's only 35 years old and has 2 small children that come into the room with him, and he talks about, my body is dying, and this is what it's going to be like, and I'm okay, and I'm not afraid. And it's such a rich gift to these children experiencing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Time to take a little break, get a drink of water, and walk around and stretch. I just want to be sure I say thank you to all of you that use that Amazon banner over the holidays, or who continue to do so. I so appreciate you, and that you do this to help support the show. I know you guys know that this show is a labor of love, and any donation or gesture that you do to support it, it's really appreciated. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it's not really a tip, but one thing I want to tell you that I discovered over the holidays is the flavor of Kavita. That is pineapple flavored. Oh, yum. It is so delicious. You guys got to try it. I think now it's my favorite one. You know, they have tonics, and then they just have the regular Kavitas. This is a regular one. So you guys go try the pineapple one. It's awesome. And lastly, don't forget to think about if you want to join the alternative healthcare plan called Greensurance. If so, remember there's a link on my products page all the way down at the bottom, and you can sign up from there. Okay, you ready? Let's get back to the show. Here we go. And I wonder, though, what about people who end up in the hospital? Like maybe it's from an accident, or maybe it's a disease and it was an emergency and they did take themselves to the hospital, and maybe they wish they hadn't. But what about if you get to the hospital and then you realize you're dying? Can the death doula get them out of the hospital and home?
Well, the death doula does not have the legal right to do anything. That would be your advanced healthcare advocate that you have assigned from your healthcare directive. But the goal would be to have those conversations and with the loved ones, and help everybody come together and begin to embrace what's happening, so that you can take that one home. Yes.
And if they were to die in the hospital, like it suddenly happened, then what happens? Is there any legal laws that they can't bring them home after they've died?
No, we can. Well, each state has its own laws, but in California, yes, the body can come home and the family can prepare it and lay it out, as long as it's on ice within 24 hours, which we always make sure happens. Yes, we can continue this 3-day vigil in the home, which is very healing, especially for one who died suddenly.
Right. And is there something that the children need to do differently? As you said, in this case, these young children had time, but in most cases where you've seen there's young children involved, do they become part of every conversation? Yes,
they become not just the conversations, but the actual process itself. Very often they'll be standing there while the bathing ritual is taking place. They'll be helping with the box. They'll help decide what to place on the altar. And when a young person is a part of every little piece of the process, it helps them put back together what was fractured there in the hospital, which was so sudden and so traumatic. They get the time to heal.
And is there ever a case where children are too fearful to be involved in the process of a home death?
Sometimes they're not ready, depending on their age. Sometimes teenagers it's harder for them because they're in a different stage in their own process, and nothing's forced if nobody has to be a part of it. So we're always considering each individual's needs and special place. But oftentimes, if you give somebody the space to not be a part of it, and the body is there for 3 days, by the third day, in their own time, they will come around and they'll be willing, ready, and able to pay their own respects and to sit with the body. And so we allow each person their own.
Right, so they're not forced. You let them do however feels right for them.
Yes, and that's why it's better than suddenly arriving at a funeral service with an open casket, and now they're confronted with it for 2 minutes, and the body has been embalmed. It doesn't really even look like their mom or whatever. That can oftentimes be much more traumatic than having mom in the house, in a back bedroom, in a beautiful setting, when they're given their own time to move into the room if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do you find that people that are maybe that were very spiritual in their life, or that are very religious or were very religious in their life, as they're dying, it's an easier transition for them?
Not necessarily. It's different for everybody. The way they live their life is usually the way they die. Some people who are of religious beliefs have a lot of underlying fears that don't actually surface until the end, which can make it even more difficult for them. I wouldn't say that people who are religious have an easier dying, not necessarily.
And do you find that the dying ask you lots of questions about death as they're dying, in those early stages of dying?
Some people do, but it's very personal. Their concerns more often is for those around them, actually, interestingly enough, how the people around them are going to manage, how they're going to cope, especially if somebody's younger.
Right. Or if they're leaving young children behind, I'm sure.
Yes. And even if they did ask me questions, it wouldn't really serve them for me to say what I think, because that's my own personal belief that I have come to after my own years and years. If they asked me specifically to share what I believe, I would, but mostly I stay in inquiry, because I think that's the most helpful place to be, is to ask them where they are. What's your understanding of what's happening or going to happen? And we'll talk about that, and then over the months it may change.
Right, and maybe just by being able to verbalize their own beliefs or having a conversation about it may help them renew their beliefs, or not necessarily beliefs, but sometimes just having a conversation about it can put people at peace, because new ideas or deeper understandings of things can come up in a conversation between two people rather than just the person dying laying there thinking.
Mm-hmm. And it's often easier to have an outside voice. Sometimes people will not bring up these questions with a loved one or a family member for multiple reasons, but they will with me. But I've found, and I do want to say this for those who want to move into this field of death midwifery, the only real qualification, if you will, is the ability to be able to stay very present to what is, without attachment, judgment, opinions, and to listen, to really deeply just listen and be present to that person who's in front of you. And that can't really take place unless the person who's wanting to do this work has been on their own journey for a long time. I think this is not something that happens, oh, I have an idea, I'd like to go and sit with dying people. I'm a compassionate person. it is so multi-layered. And unless one has deeply investigated what dying means to them and has meditated on their own dying for years, then I don't think they're fully prepared to be next to another who is actually in the process. And those people who are in their dying process will be able to pick that up, and it will look inauthentic to them, and it will be almost an invasion to have that person be bedside. This is why I actually included another class in the Art of Death Midwifery program, and I realized that some of the students hadn't really truly been present to their own death and what it really means. So I added Enter the Grave, which is a deeply personal investigation and experiential workshop, meditations and written exercises and group process. And again, it's just the beginning, and the students are invited and encouraged to do that on a daily basis before they even begin to study what conscious dying is or how to care for a body, which is critical.
And your program, you offer a kind of, I guess you would call it a training or a certification program for people to do this work. Can you tell us a little bit about what it entails and how long it is and this kind of stuff?
Yes, it's a year-long program. There's 4 intensive workshops, beginning with the one I just mentioned, Enter the Grave, which is a personal investigation process. Each workshop is 3 long days. It takes place here in Los Angeles. The second class is Conscious Dying, where we look at what it means to die consciously and how to be with somebody who's in their dying process. The third one is the after-death care of the body, how to help a family who want to have this 3-day vigil and home funeral. And then the last workshop is the funeral celebration, which I think is so often missed or discarded as something that's not necessary. And I think it's critical to have a funeral service, if possible, with the body present, but if not, then a memorial service. And this one is really helping people understand the role of the celebrant and how to hold that sacred space for people to begin their grieving process at that ceremony, which is really a celebration of life. So it's very uplifting and joyous.
Well, what a wonderful program, because I think there's probably a lot of people that have thought about doing work like hospice, but this is quite different, and it offers kind of another option for someone who's really willing and wants to be with the dying person to help them, because what a gift, as you said, for both. Mm-hmm. I've been with a couple of people that have died, and it's an amazing experience, actually.
Oh, it is. I think it would be wonderful if everybody, as they neared their dying days, they were to say, can you call the death midwife? And it would be something that you would be able to go online and you would find someone local in your area who could come to your house, and you could have maybe 1 hour session or weekly sessions with somebody who could guide you through this process. And it would be a no-brainer. Everybody gets a birth midwife. So why wouldn't we all have a death midwife too? It makes so much sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm curious about end-of-life drugs, because I'm a person who had a near-death experience when I was 11, and I basically suffocated. I was in a horse accident, and I left my body, and I watched them resuscitating me, and I remember going through the tunnel with the light, and I was a kid that was always afraid of dark and dying, but I wasn't afraid. I felt very at peace, and mine was an accident. Next thing I know, I was back in my body, but my partner, Lloyd, he had an accident and he severed his aorta and he died a couple times, and they brought him back, but he was on severe doses of morphine, and he had a much different, darker experience. And I've always wondered after that. And my mom also, she was in a coma and given lots of morphine. And when she woke, her experience was quite dark and not nice. And I was wondering if you've had any in your readings or studies. So many people at the end of life are given really high doses of morphine or other drugs, do you think that can affect the natural dying process of the soul leaving the body?
It's a tricky question to answer. Do I think that? Because I haven't had that experience for myself. Obviously, I don't remember a dying when I had morphine as to when I didn't. For myself, though, I know I have chosen to stay as conscious as humanly possible. And if pain medication was needed, it would be just to take the edge off. But I hope by then I would have developed enough practices that I could manage it myself. I labored without any medication, and it was the most incredible experience ever. But there are many people who would not even imagine birthing without pain medication. So it's, again, a personal preference. My belief is that we over-medicate terribly at the end, which robs people of the possibility of having a conscious dying experience. Again, it's not something you can push, because a lot of people's biggest fear is pain.
That's true. And I think it's exactly as you said, we've over-medicated. So maybe it's not the fact of medication or no medication, it's the fact of over-medicating to the point where you've just basically kind of put the person to sleep, and they've lost all connection with the last moments or last hours. And maybe that's more the part that I'm speaking of that feels that way to me. But that's true. It is a person's biggest fear. Many people do have a horrible fear of pain. Mm-hmm. So we have to allow them to have their experience, I'm sure, the way that they need to feel good about it. And if that's to take the pain away, then that might be right for them.
And again, it hurts to the degree we resist. So if we can learn in our life to lean into pain and embrace it, then it doesn't have that grip that it does when we resist it and recoil away from it. So a part of the training is to lean into all of these life experiences so that they become just that, just another experience. And birth for me, it wasn't painful, it was intense. Very, very, very intense. But I couldn't put the word pain on it because I didn't resist any of it. And the midwife I had, those were her words, just lean into it. It's just your baby. It's just an experience. And when you hear that constantly while you're moving into something which could be painful, and that is filled with pain, filled with resistance to what is, I'm striving for my dying experience. I'm hoping that it will be very similar to my birthing experience, which will be intense, but can I allow and expand and open to it and lean into it, and therefore have the experience consciously?
That's very nicely said. Do you feel with this new law in many states that's kind of allowing people to, I don't know if you'd call it like medical suicide, but they're allowed now to get a prescription of a dose of a certain medication that will end their life when they have a certain diagnosis? You think this situation can be helped with a death doula also if it's planned and the family's around and everything could take place in the same way? Or would this change the experience?
I think taking one's life, which is what it is, as when you take that medication, is a very different experience to dying naturally. And that's a big conversation. And I have that workshop also, assisted suicide before you decide. Because once again, what is it one is truly afraid of that is making them make the choice to take their own life? Is it really pain and suffering? That conversation must be investigated. It must be deeply and profoundly looked at and unpacked until you, and I think this is the real role of the midwife in this case, is to have those hours of conversations with the person who wants to lean towards that, and to find out what is the nugget in the middle that they're shying away from, and invite them to lean into that. That would be my goal. We're too hasty to go to the quick fix. I'll just take the drugs, which is the beginning of the conversation when we went to modern conveniences and we did the quick fix, give the body away to the funeral home. We lost the meaning of life. We're losing our connection to life itself in this quick fix. And is assisted suicide or assisted aid in dying or whatever we like to call it, is it the same thing?
Yeah, good point. Are there any good books that my listeners or I or anybody out there can read to learn more about being prepared for death or, your work or just dying?
Oh my goodness, there are so many books. I'm looking at my whole shelf right now. I hesitate bringing out one. Osho wrote a lovely book, The Art of Living and Dying. And of course, Stephen Jenkinson's book, Die Wise, is a powerful, beautiful, poetic look at the meaning of death and how to die consciously, openly. Those would be my two favorites right now.
And is there an age that people should be prepared, let's say even for the legal documents, but beyond that, to start thinking of this? Is there an age that is the right time?
I think we should have this class in high school. So nobody graduates high school without an advanced healthcare directive and a death file. So that's what would be my goal, is to take this into schools, create a program.
Yeah, a lot of things need to be taken into schools, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds like we spend so much time doing things that we don't use later in life, when things and tools like this could make life so different, couldn't it?
Yes. The youth, interestingly enough, they're open to have this conversation. It's a good one to have, and then revisit every 5 years. My daughter has her directives completed, and she felt good about sharing it with me and realized that, oh my gosh, Mom, I'm so glad I told you this, because I certainly don't want what you want. So I was like, good.
That's why you have to do it, because you can't assume anything.
No.
So what 3 most important things could you leave the listeners with, maybe, and how they can best prepare for their death?
Have a conversation with your loved ones, your next of kin, your children. Bring them around the table and open up the conversation. I know this is a difficult conversation, but I've been thinking about it. And when my body dies, this is what I would like to happen. Have that conversation. Dare to be the first one and open up for the others around the table to share with you what they want. That would be my most important question. And secondly, I would ask people to deeply contemplate their dying, so that it's not something that's unfamiliar and scary. It will be when you start to meditate on it, but keep going and look at all of the little aspects that are hidden in there. What is it that you're afraid of, that you're even afraid to admit you're afraid of? You can do this quietly on your own, in your bed, just before you go to sleep at night or first thing in the morning. I would urge people to begin to do that and to start reading about it. Read those 2 books. Go to classes, meditation workshops that would help you be present to pain and suffering when it comes up, because it's going to in the end anyway. So why not begin it now? Create a toolbox that you can rely on in your dying days.
And be sure to put a homeopathic kit in that toolbox.
Yes, homeopathic bark flowers, natural remedies.
Yeah, homeopathy is pretty amazing. I've used it a few times when people have made the transition, and it acts beautifully. It's really something I call, my listeners know we have a wellness toolbox, so now we need to add a death toolbox.
Yes.
That's not a bad idea, Olivia.
Yeah, the death and dying kit.
Exactly. Well, actually, I have a friend who did their thesis in her homeopathic school on homeopathic remedies for death and dying. So you could make a little kit out of it, actually.
Absolutely.
So thank you. This has been wonderful, and I think it's a really important subject to get out. I know when people see the title of this, because everybody's so afraid of dying and having a conversation about death, but that's exactly why I wanted to look you up, because I know it's probably not been on another podcast, this kind of work. And I think it's really important, as you said, especially those last three things. The sooner that we get prepared, even if we're super healthy, the longer that we have to kind of be more okay with that and keep perfecting what we want and have everything ready to go and just be okay with it. And that's the first step, is just to get the information to people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
So this podcast today, this episode of my podcast, is just really to bring this idea to the surface that many people have pushed under really far. So thank you so much for being the person to share this. And I'm going to put all your information in the show notes. Do you have a Facebook and Twitter? And
I do. There's a sacredcrossings.com is the website. And the Facebook, there's a Sacred Crossings page where I put quotes and interesting photographs and notes about the classes. I'm not a Twitter, sorry.
Okay, no problem. But I'll put all those things in the notes so people can find you and your work.
Thank you.
And thanks again. I so appreciate it.
And thank you, Deborah, for doing this work and for putting the word out there. It's so needed. God bless you.
So how you guys doing? What'd you think about that one? I hope you learned something, and that maybe now you can see a totally different side of death and why it's so important to have a conversation with our loved ones while we're alive. There's so many things going on at the time of death, and in the case of sudden death especially, the last thing your loved ones need is more stress on making decisions, and they may not even know what it was you wanted. So speak up and begin a conversation about your death. I so believe in this. I know when my mom was in her coma for almost 60 days, she did not have an advanced health care derivative. But as soon as she woke up, we made sure she did. No one should go through life as an adult without one. You need to pick someone you really trust that'll follow through with your wishes, but it's a must. So please, if there's one thing you learned from today's show, it's that you're going to go make an advanced health care directive. And as you learned today, there's many other things to prepare for regarding our death, and you can find the links in the show notes for you to get more information on all that you need to get done. Okay, you guys, and as this year is ending, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for being there with me every Wednesday. Thank you for sitting around my table and joining me in our weekly health and life discussions. I so love having you with me every week. You're all my new friends, and may this new year bring in a new life, a new love, new ideas to heal all of us in every way possible. May we make steps to heal not only us, but our planet and all of our wonderful animals. May you have a great end to this year and a great beginning of next year. I hope you enjoyed the show today, my podcast family. You must know what time it is. Yes, it's time to say goodbye, and it's goodbye for the end of 2016. Wow. And I'll see you guys in 2017. Bye for now. Vidal has spoken. Remember, you heal with a plant-powered diet, homeopathy, and detoxing, of course. Peace. Be healthy. Be free. Live life.